Welcome you all here. This is our last roundtable of the day, and what we're going to talk about is media manipulation and how the blockchain can preserve it, the history, or destroy it. I think we got some real nice people here on this panel here. Luke Rudowski, if you don't know Luke, he's with We Are Change. He's a guy that kind of video bombs people. Can we say that? That's fair.
Yeah, pretty much.
So yeah, he's got some of the best of the best. Okay. Look, can you just tell us a little bit about what you've done in that field? I think that's if you don't know about it, it's
Pissed off a lot of creatures from the Jekyll Island. There's been so much work, and it's been definitely changing throughout the times. We more focus on just getting the most accurate information out there right now as a real news source that doesn't go left or right. We pretty much got our start by pissing off people like the Rothschilds, the Kissingers, Rockefellers, confronting them one-on-one, face-to-face, and letting them know that we know exactly what's really happening in this world and that we're not going to be afraid and they're not going to win at all. But it's since changed a lot. And now there's so many different facets, there's so many different videos, there's so many different formats that it's just taken its own kind of world into itself.
And of course, we have G. Edward Griffin here, and I think the thing that a lot of us have had, his book, Creature Jekyll Island, as sort of a foundational book. And I think it's really obvious, it's great to have you here as the historian, the authority on this. But I mean, your book really sought to capture history that you're not going to find in a school book. You talk about, this is for a lot of us, this is kind of gospel on some real history of the Federal Reserve. But it's not something you would ever see in a school book or...
Right, definitely not in the school book. And it is a history book, but most people don't realize it. You have to trick them into reading history. That's what you had to do to me, because I came through school. I thought reading books was something you did as punishment because you were a student. And the minute you were free of that onus, why you didn't have to read any books anymore. And that's because I never really read any real history books in school. It wasn't until I came out of school and got involved in some of the issues that are being discussed here that I realized that, my gosh, everything is in history. History is more important than reality, because, more important than fantasy, because it is reality. And anyway, to make a long story short, when I wrote The Creature from Jekyll Island, I saw it as a combination of a history book and a whodunit. So I wrote it as a whodunit. And because if people sensed that it was a history book, they wouldn't read it. So I wrote it as kind of a mystery book, who did the crime and why they did it and where they buried the bodies and so forth. And apparently that worked. But anyway, thank you for compliments on it. I never believed anybody would read that thing. I wrote it because I had to.
Sterling, I think you've put yourself out there essentially as not only he writes for Bitcoin.com, Bitcoin Magazine, right?
Bitcoin.com.
Bitcoin.com, and he's taken an approach here. He just did one of his presentations, and he talks about the psychology, what that actually does to people. Talk about that a little bit and how this is opening up people and giving them other perspectives of history and also maybe some censorship issues.
Right. So my main focus, and I also, besides the talk that I just gave tonight, which is on the psychology of cryptocurrency and the new psychology of money, I wrote an article for Bitcoin.com about how cryptocurrency is ultimately changing our psychology, how it's making us more empathetic, more compassionate, more dignified and decent human beings. And that's really the crux of what a decentralized peer-to-peer technology can do for us. But kind of moving forward a little bit as well, writing for Bitcoin.com has been a little bit of a challenge because there's a lot of nonsense being circulated by the mainstream media and also a lot of censorship that occurs not only in the space between people who don't have any relationship to cryptocurrencies, but by people who are actually in the ecosystem who have different types of agendas. And luckily, this has started to cool off a little bit. The censorship has cooled off a little bit. And as most of you know, it was as a result of the fork that took place on Bitcoin recently, just here back at August 1. So censorship, and Luke probably faces some of this to a degree as well in his space, but censorship in what we do in bringing a new kind of media front to everybody is really causing an issue. Censorship it's devastating our ability to tell the truth, and mainstream media pundits will continue to attempt to obscure what we're saying and cause issues with what we're saying. And here's just one, I'll just give one example, one last thing. As I go through the media sources, I have to read media sources every day being a journalist for Bitcoin.com because the ecosystem is continuously changing. And the only article that I could ever find by all the mainstream sources was that Bitcoin is a bubble. So every time something happens negatively in the space, Bitcoin's a bubble. So I just wrote an article simply called Bitcoin is not a bubble. And that didn't go over too well with a lot of different people who have an agenda on their mind in regards to cryptocurrency, and most of them don't really understand the nature of cryptocurrencies anyway. So this is the kind of material that different factions in the mainstream media tend to want to censor and have some resistance toward.
Well, just speaking of that, I'll let you guys, we just saw this last week. Obviously, anyone in this space has followed what happened with China and obviously Jamie Dimon. We see the value go down, and right away, what do we see? We see media coming right with articles almost ready to go about the Bitcoin bubble's burst. Here it is, it's down. And anyone now that's in the space, we're getting used to these fluctuations, and what happens? Of course, it starts to rebound, and we're back to the roughly $4,000 level. So, yeah, you realize that there is an agenda. That was very, I think, telling that there was this agenda that right away it was like, oh yeah, it's bursting, it's bad, it's what it's doing. But
Right. Yeah, and that's, of course, anyone who understands the purpose of cryptocurrency, the space that we're in, what the blockchain has done to revolutionize finance, what it's done to revolutionize contractual interactions between consenting human beings. We know that it's not the value proposition for blockchain technologies do not make these currencies automatically into a bubble just because someone doesn't like the price point that they have managed to maintain. Yeah, they're acting as a store of value, and they're going to continue to, investors are going to continue to come into the space. More people are going to get involved in using these currencies, and it is going to continue to rise, especially if the protocol is built where it's more geared to being a commodity. So all of these people, of course, a lot of them are authoritarian types. They're bankers. They're defending the legacy financial system. And what they want to do is try to tear us down. They want to try to prevent us from proposing these ideas and pushing these ideas forward of what Bitcoin actually is, of what the blockchain actually does for society. So this is something we always have to be aware of, keen on, and continuously combating. And to speak to what we're trying to do here in terms of cryptocurrency and the blockchain, a beautiful thing is we are mitigating some of the censorship already by creating blockchain-based blogs like Steemit and some of these other platforms like Yours Network, if anybody's heard of that, where we can start producing media content, any content we want that is not going to be easily censorable, and a lot more people are going to get involved in using those applications.
Luke, I'm going to turn it to you a little bit. Media moves so fast, and you're out there, again, just sort of, getting in people's faces. And I think what you do is interesting because you're getting these responses to issues, a lot of them they don't want to talk about again. And I saw a couple you did, Peter, there was a King up in New York, a couple of them. You get back to him, you say, no, I want that answer. Talk about that a little bit with.
Well, it's difficult now. I mean, I think the censorship is the bigger issue that we should talk about because I think that's going to affect a lot of us more than we actually know it. And we're more important now than ever. We're living in a very incredible time right now where anything is possible. Nothing is impossible. You could create and do what you want, and you can make a huge effect in this world right now, this very moment, with just a pure idea. But at the same time, we're living in a time where that idea could be crushed in a matter of seconds, and there's no recourse to even take it back. There's many forms of censorship. I mean, when I started out in the early 2000s shooting videos, it used to be police officers beating me up. Then it kind of transitioned to protesters beating me up. throwing piss at me. Then it transitioned to police officers putting a gun to my head, which happened by Homeland Security at the NATO meeting in Chicago. And it escalated to death threats and harassment just because I was reporting, showing people what was happening. And that was the old style of censorship, that fear, that intimidation. Because back then, the internet was free, open, and wide. Google, if you had a popular video, which they had Google Movies back then, if your movie or video was the #1 viewed video, it would be #1, and then they took that away. On YouTube, if your video got the most amount of views than anybody else, it would be listed as #1. It would be categorized for everyone to see. That all changed. That all shifted, and now we're seeing a kind of new censorship, a new soft kind of censorship, where, we're hearing about all these YouTube channels being demonetized right now. I was being demonetized before it was even cool to be demonetized years ago. And seeing the amount of power that Google and Facebook have, it really even brought me into a conundrum with some of my kind of libertarian philosophies, because understanding that these corporations, they are going to be more powerful than governments if they are not already. And they did it because the government and the elites are a lot smarter than we give them credit to. They understand people like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. Those are individuals. Those are very easy targets to pinpoint and look at and be like, he did something wrong. Bigger corporations, bigger brands that intelligence agencies gave seed funding to, like they did to Google, like they did to Facebook. There's a reason when Barack Obama said, Google and Facebook wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the government. There's a reason he said that, because it's true. These companies get government subsidies. They work in cooperation with each other, and the technologies that they're developing are extremely frightening, especially with their AI development, which I haven't heard anyone talk about here yet. But that's a whole huge red herring that everyone needs to discuss and needs to realize and face the reality of, because quantum computing and artificial intelligence, with their advancements that they're going to have, they could break encryption. They could take down cryptocurrencies. This is something that we need to face the reality of. I remember being younger, I started off my speeches like I did today, where I said, we could do anything, anything's possible. But I didn't have that second part. Now, seeing the new form of censorship encroaching all of us, seeing the demonetization, seeing the algorithm changes, seeing Twitter ban people, Patreon ban people, Facebook block people, seeing them hurt your reach is really such an incredible threat that we cannot undermine. And the solution, of course, is not government regulation, and the solution at the same time is not saying that Google is a private company and they could do what they want, because they're not. People need to realize that as well, because without government, they wouldn't be as powerful as they are right now. So there's this conundrum philosophically that I'm facing. In no way do I want government to regulate them, because the government will just take the power and use it against all of us later. But the corporatocracy that is working with them is also just as bad. And I really think maybe we're even too late. Maybe it's even too late for the end game with the technology that they have, because as we know, the government and private corporations, they have so much technological advancements that they do not release, that they do not make public. But right now, if it's not too late, it's really, really critically important for everyone to understand the power that they have and to not just use things for convenience. It's great to use Google Chrome. It's very convenient. It's very hard for me to even stop using that application and ad blocker. We all love ad blocker. It's difficult, but right now, I think it's really important for all of us to take initiatives not only to participate in other third-party platforms, but to invest in them and to push them, because if we don't, and we may be already too late, these corporations are going to take everything over, and they are in a very scary way.
Before I get to you, can you talk about the AI? You've got into this space a little bit.
Yeah, I can briefly talk about AI, and I'm more interested right now in talking about the quantum computing issues that he brought up and how it can potentially affect Bitcoin and break cryptography. Luke is right. There is a possibility that when quantum computing goes full mainstream in some type of probably government agency or definitely a university who's working on these types of computers could potentially crack the SHA, the secure hash algorithms that Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are created on. However, it is, by the same token, there's always a way to defend ourselves or defend ourselves technologically against what government does. And that's exactly what Bitcoin was in general. You know, the NSA developed secure hash algorithms and early encryption during World War II and a little bit earlier on. So we know that they're the ones who really started this encryption program off. But then we had crypto anarchists and libertarians who saw this as a problem and wanted to use their medicine to fight back the bad medicine with good medicine that's basically based on the same technology. So blockchain technology was created by anarchists to fight back against the original forms of encryption that they created, using their technology against them, essentially. In terms of the quantum computing issue, currently all we have, and there's a lot of people who are confused by this, quantum computers don't actually exist right now. What exists are what we call quantum annealers. These are computer programs that are specifically designed to complete some kind of task, one single task. So these annealers are not going to break the encryption methods that we have right now. And even if this does happen, if quantum computing comes along and it's able to undermine the blockchain technology as we see it right now, there's always ways to develop new encryption protocols because we're working with consensus networks. We can use those networks to upgrade protocols, create new technologies. But the scary thing about quantum computing, to speak to what Luke said, is that if somebody does, suddenly some genius creates a quantum computer that works, what's going to happen, and there's reasons they wouldn't do this, but what could happen instantly, all that money is just gone and you don't even know who did it because they broke encryption and then they just got into it. But here's the catch-22 that these type of individuals find themselves in. Once they break that encryption and take all that money, what's the value in that money now? Why would you break into something and take all the money when it suddenly becomes valueless? Of course, they could use that technology to do other nefarious things, which government and their secret agendas and their secret bases and hideouts, they're always trying to do these things and undermine what we're doing. But I believe strongly that crypto anarchists, developers, programmers, all the geeks with hot pocket grease stains on their shirt collars are going to continue to do everything possible to fight back against state technological control. And he mentioned AI. I'll just speak briefly to AI. AI is not that, in terms of quantum computing and AI, I think AI is a problem that we're even further away from. Computers are getting smarter, and the original individuals who developed computers, the programmers who developed, the geniuses who were involved in that, and that was a collaborative effort, by the way. There's a really good book to check out on this topic written by Walter Isaacson called The Innovators, where he talks about the different people involved in building computers and networks. They were at the same time involved in building nuclear weapons, ironically, and they were also involved in developing AI. They had a profound interest in what we call machine learning, and these are the individuals who know that to see this stuff coming. So even if AI crops up and is able to, and this is an Asimov issue where the AI comes alive and it doesn't follow the programming rules that we designed for it. What are the three laws of robotics, right, that Asimov came up with? I can't remember them off the top of my head, but basically they don't follow the rules set forth. Has anybody seen Westworld? If you want the worst possible scenario when it comes to AI, just watch Westworld and you'll find out. But that's a problem that's far off from now. The quantum computing is going to happen way before we have an issue with AI, any kind of artificial technology. Because even in terms of AI, we don't even know how to define consciousness. This is what neuroscientists, cognitive philosophers call the frame problem. We don't know how to designate and look at what consciousness actually is. We can't even describe our own consciousness. We just know that the brain is highly neurally networked, and we always, of course, use computer metaphors to describe how our brain works. And we don't even know how it works precisely. We don't know how consciousness arises. And we definitely don't know how our subjective experiences, our experience of emotions arise. And this is what's called the hard problem of consciousness. Until these problems are solved and we come to understand them, it's going to be difficult to develop a consciousness living, artificially intelligent machine.
I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that. Do you mind?
Elaborate on that. Artificial intelligence, somebody talking about me?
Can you just, because you really probably felt a lot of censorship after your book. Can you talk a little bit about that, of just what the response was from the establishment?
Well, thanks for saving the day for me on that, because now I don't have to talk about things I don't know anything about. I have not had any censorship. somebody asked me a similar question earlier, have I been persecuted? Have I been threatened? And the answer is no. Not seriously, a couple of weird phone calls, but nothing more than the average person might get. So I cannot claim any great success, because I think anybody that's doing something meaningful along the areas of freedom and independence and financial security, if they start doing something significant, they're going to feel it, because the system has to push back. So the fact that I have to answer that question, I'm a little apologetic about it, because it tells me that I haven't done enough yet to cause a serious problem. I expect it. I always have expected it. Someone asked me earlier, aren't you afraid? You picked the banking system, the New World Order, and pharmaceutical industry. Those are big players. Aren't you afraid? I said, of course I'm afraid. I'd be a fool not to be. But everybody should be afraid about what's happening in the world today. It's affecting all of us. There's no way out of this, and you can't hide just by being afraid, saying, well, I won't fight, I won't resist, I'll even pretend like I don't understand. That doesn't get you out of the danger zone at all. In fact, it just puts you deeper into it. It just means that the more you put off resisting this thing, the less chance you have of surviving. So yeah, I'm very much afraid of this, and I'm a little bit excited about the fact that some of the things we're doing, which I think are going to ramp up our effectiveness a lot, which means I'm going to get this kind of pushback and censorship. There's one thing about a book, you can't censor it except, I mean, especially if it's published already and already well circulated, it's harder to stop a book from being published than it is to take it off of everybody's shelves. One of the reasons I like being a writer is because I can get away with it, you know? And if they come after me because of something I wrote, that doesn't get rid of what I wrote. Now, if I were just somebody like a politician or a comedian or an entertainer of some kind, then, you know, an individual like that is very vulnerable to being snuffed out or having their reputation crucified so badly that nobody wants to even talk to them anymore. But if you've written something and it's already out there, there's no point in them making a martyr out of you. So maybe that's the reason that nothing has happened to me. I don't know. So that's the answer. I'm embarrassed to talk about it because it's all me. But I do want to comment on the topic of the discussion on the paper that I got. It was something about, will the cryptocurrency affect history? Will it help history, or will it hurt it? And what I'm about to say, I think everybody knows instinctively, and that is that the technology of whether it's cryptocurrency or any kind of digital programming is wonderful in the ability to make information available and distributed faster and all of that. But it's inherently very dangerous because there's nothing permanent. It can be lost. It can be put into the Orwellian memory hole just like that. And it can be altered. Data can be changed, and nobody would know that it has been changed. And so I think that in general, technology is a great threat to the preservation of honest history. So what do we do about that? We can't be anti-technology. I think there's something we can do, and that is, let's try in every way we can to create or restore reverence for the printed word. Let's love those books. Let's get those books. I'd like to see, I was talking to a chap here earlier, lives locally. He said he used to run a bookstore here in town. So what happened to the bookstore? Well, it's still there, but it's struggling, and bookstores are going out of business because everybody's going digital. And I felt that again. Why can't we must marshal some kind of a crusade, you know, put a dollar in the hat so we can save our local bookstore or something. Yeah, I think we have to restore reverence for the printed page and the book, and that's all I can say is we have to do that. Otherwise, we're setting our grandchildren and great-grandchildren into great peril. That's it.
Luke, I wanted to bring up, you've had the interesting phenomena of really being on the front line, and now you're having protesters turn against you. Can you talk about that?
Well, there's a lot of power in media. I do believe that information has been weaponized very effectively by the powers that be or the intelligence agencies, whether it's through known programs like Operation Mockingbird. But really, information and knowledge are the most important key aspect of any society, of any power structure. If they could control the dialogue, if they could control the narrative, they are in charge. And, we started breaking that paradigm on the internet. But then more voices started being censored. And now what we're seeing is an oversensitization of pushing people further left or further right. And from a media perspective, studying and analyzing media, if I wanted to have a big media organization, if I wanted to have a lot of money, I would simply pick either the left or right, only talk about the good side of my side and the bad side of the other side, and try to push against each other. So just like we saw with Operation Mockingbird of the intelligence agencies and the CIA kind of take over mainstream media television, I think there's a new kind of Operation Mockingbird 2.0 happening right now that's happening online, that's happening digitally. And I think it's two-pronged. I think it works to the benefit of a lot of people to divide people, either left or right. But there's also a financial incentive from a lot of the media companies. If you're able to spread sensational information, if you're able to make people feel rage, sadness, and fear, people are more likely to click and share something that evokes those emotions. And I think that has been, our own psychology has been used against us in so many significant ways. And I refuse to play into it, even though I got jumped and beat down in Hamburg by Antifa. Even though Antifa threw piss at me, I still refuse to join the right, even though naturally people would from that emotional kind of experience that they went through, getting the crap beat out of them and going through all these threats and harassments and doxing and threatening of your family members. I refuse to do so because ultimately what we're seeing right now is people bickering and fighting to the point where they're killing each other in the streets of the United States because of these two labels over a freaking statue. And this is happening while the banksters are robbing us blind, the middle class is being destroyed, our food and water is being poisoned, corporations and government are doing whatever the hell they want, especially in the international world stage, especially with all the latest horrible foreign policy moves by Donald Trump. And at the same time, these people still think that they're each other's enemy. And people need to realize that them being bad and media focusing on how they're just bad on this side weaponizes them and builds them up. And without Antifa doing something stupid, you wouldn't have people on the far right. Without people on the far right doing something stupid, you wouldn't have people on the far left. And in reality, that's how they kind of divide and conquer us. And I think this is the bigger issue that kind of left me more pessimistic recently, because seeing it in the streets, being there at Berkeley, being there in Hamburg, seeing the rage and aggression being pointed against each other instead of the real threat against us, it's kind of disappointing. And that's why I refuse to capitulate. I refuse to go after the fame or the money like other people do, and other people, even within our own independent media sphere, like we've seen, switch automatically. Instead of talking about the left and right, now they're only talking about the left, and how they're bad, and how the President Trump is great. So seeing that, I'm like wake up. It's sometimes I think it's a losing battle, but I'm still not giving up on it, because I know at the end of the day, what we have is just our choices. And our choices are more important and significant than you could imagine. Opening up DuckDuckGo instead of Google is extremely significant. Taking away that kind of, going to Steemit instead of Facebook, it has such a significant impact. Voting with your dollar through corporations and startups that are doing something good, helping your fellow man and woman, are a lot more important than just indulging and hoarding and holding things for yourself. Because at the end of the day, it's important to understand these things. It's important to know what's really happening, but it's very critically important not to worry, not to be in fear, and understand that ultimately we all are in control, and at the end of the day, you have your choices that you made, and you have your soul and you have your consciousness, and that is more important than you could ever imagine. It's not convenient, it's not easy, but it's worthwhile when you're able to sleep at night and know that you did make a difference. And if all of us do that, if all of us just understand that basic hippy-dippy idea, the world would change in an instant.
Here, here.
Yeah.
Sterling, how long have you been writing for Bitcoin.com?
I was with Bitcoin.com almost since the beginning, since Roger started the company. I was very early on. Jamie Redmond, who also writes for Bitcoin.com, came to me and asked if I would like to be part of an awesome project that Roger is starting to work on, and it kind of blossomed from there. And I joined as a part-time writer early on, but I mostly wrote op-ed articles and short essays.
So you've seen it from the beginning. Talk a little bit about now you're becoming more mainstream. Talk about that journey getting more mainstream.
Okay, yeah. Earlier on in my career with cryptocurrency, I didn't even. Okay, I start. Is that okay if I start at the beginning here? Sort of,
Sure.
Is how to go about this. So I didn't get into cryptocurrency until about 2015, but I discovered cryptocurrency in 2012, and it wasn't until I went to PorcFest in New Hampshire in 2015 that I really got involved with using cryptocurrency. Because has anybody been to PorcFest here? So at PorcFest, they have a marketplace they just call Agora Valley, and everybody does transactions in Bitcoin, generally speaking. And before that, I had heard of Bitcoin, and I thought it was interesting. I thought cryptocurrency was interesting, but I hadn't actually got to use it in a practical, understandable way. So at that point in time, I was like, wow, this is really easy to use. It's streamlined. It's not as difficult and abstract as I thought it was. It's very, very easy to take advantage of. So I went back home and I was like, yeah, to my wife. And we got to get into Bitcoin now. And I was totally obsessed with it. I was reading everything about it that I could. And of course, this was around the same time that I joined the Bitcoin.com team. Might have been a little bit before that, but like I said, I was just writing op-ed articles. And as I continue to work for Bitcoin.com, I'm currently working on my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling with Texas A&M University. And so I was working on that, and then I started to develop my own philosophy, which is this philosophy of relational anarchism, this idea that we can create freer societies by learning to relate and connect with each other. And all at the same time getting into cryptocurrency and trying to figure out how cryptocurrency can also facilitate our desire to build connections and empathize with one another. And my conclusion was that decentralized peer-to-peer technologies are naturally what lead us to building a new society and altering the dominator paradigm that we're currently living under. So to his question, going mainstream in this way has been, it's almost like the story of Bitcoin also going mainstream, because as I started to use Bitcoin more and as I started to write about it more and as I started to come up into the mainstream, the currency also came up into the mainstream. And my guess is that this is a lot of people's experience who are here at this conference right now, because just over the last 2 years, Bitcoin has gone from $300 to, what did it peak at, $5,000, a little over $5,000, and of course it backed off after the Chinese issue. But besides that, I kind of want to speak to what Luke also said, if that's okay. He mentioned the pessimism that he has from watching this divisiveness crop up. So I want to elevate that up a little bit and maybe look at it from an optimistic perspective. It's my hope that we can create and build new philosophies, new outlooks, and new perspectives to allow people to connect with each other and find a common ground so that they can understand that their differences are really superficial when it comes to a need level. So anybody who's familiar with Marshall Rosenberg already understands this concept, and this is the concept of nonviolent communication. So if we're leveraging nonviolent communication on a day-to-day basis, and even if the people that we're talking to aren't using it, then we're automatically helping to alter their neural circuitry so that they're understanding that we're trying to meet their needs, and that creates a situation where they're more likely to start empathizing and connecting with people on a fundamental level. And it's my hope that things like relational anarchism, nonviolent communication, and our innate human desire to have a relationship, deep relationships with other human beings, is what's going to help shift this nastiness we see, this culture of divisiveness, this culture of brutalism that's cropped up, especially between people that has been fomented by the powers that be, by the bureaucrats, by the politicians, by the people who want to see us divided. But instead of being divided, how about we work on connecting with each other? How about we work on finding the common ground, connecting the dots of our humanity, and being one? And that's how we're going to be able to fight back. And it doesn't even require us to try to argue people into a corner, to paint them into a corner. All it requires for us is try to address their needs, try to see what it is that they're really after, and then I think we'll really discover the paradise lost that we're searching for.
I'd like to say something, not to counter that at all, because I agree totally with what you've said. But I think in any realistic appraisal of this, we have to know that what Luke is talking about on the streets is not a culture of violence. It's the theater of violence. This is not an expression of our culture. These people are paid. Most of the leaders are all paid. They're financed by an American revolutionary force. And we can't just overcome that by spreading it with love, because they're paid to create violence. So along with what you're saying, which I think is certainly good advice to make sure that we ourselves aren't drawn into that, which is why they do it. That's the reason they're doing that, of course, is they want to draw people who are not paid into this foray, so they can have the semblance of real war. Now they've got what they really want, which is an excuse for martial law. Once that comes in place, then it really gets tough. So I just wanted to say that this is not the culture of violence that he's dealing with. It's the theater. I think when we talk about this, we ought to use the word theater a little bit more often to communicate the idea that we're not buying into this little 1/100th of 1% of the population doing all of this, and then the media building it up so it looks like the whole world is on fire with it.
Well, Luke, I just wanted to ask, you've obviously, we talked before about what you've experienced personally here. Talk about this, and if you would like to chime in a little bit, just historically now, this almost tyranny of sensitivity. And how we're all now having to be sensitive, and yet in its own hard way, it's causing the exact opposite results.
Well, I haven't changed anything about the way I conduct myself or the way I speak. There is, a talking point in news. If it bleeds, it leads. And I think that's been also a major kind of psychological component of human beings. Like when we see a car crash, we're going to kind of stop and look. And that kind of aspect of our own psychology has been used against us in a very big psychological warfare that I believe is used brilliantly by the elites. There has been a major push towards kind of supposedly being sensitive, but at the same time, the same people arguing for that are bashing people in the head. So we're seeing the destruction of not only our civility, but also our language and what things actually mean and what people actually are trying to say. I would just say that, it's important to understand what's happening, but it's important to understand that the solutions are all around us. I know I started this talk being kind of pessimistic about Bitcoin. I do believe it is critically important to be aware of some of the bigger, deeper issues with this. I believe it's important to diversify as much as you can and not just put all your eggs in one basket. Because in this day and age, things are changing so fast and so rapidly, you never know what to expect. I love the cryptocurrency community. If it wasn't for Bitcoin, I would be totally broke right now. We Are Change would still exist, but I'd probably be hitchhiking rides to this event or other protest. I'll be dumpster diving for food and life hacking my way through it. But because of the Bitcoin community being able to donate and share and work with me and collaborate with me, I'm able to travel on the ground, put my butt on the line and do actual reporting that does make a very significant difference. It is difficult because voices that criticize the left and right are automatically shunned. They don't get enough attention. If I was just on one side would love me, another side would attack me, and I would get double the attention. But if you criticize both, it's like, nope, you're a troublemaker, can't talk to you. And it's been really difficult to try to maintain the number of viewers that we had, especially with the latest kind of censorship that happened. But yet again, there's also Steemit. So I am incredibly even though it may not seem from my talks today, incredibly optimistic about the future, because your viewpoint is ultimately what you manifest, is ultimately what you create. And if you start looking for just the worst and horrible things and being affected by them, you're going to bring those to the surface and make them more of a reality than they actually are. Understanding them, seeing ways that we could solve them, moving past them, and understanding consciously, spiritually, you are the true decider of everything within yourself, is one of the most important aspects, because I do believe there is kind of spiritual kind of war happening right now. A very deep internal personalized battle between all of us, between good and bad. The bad side is very easy, it's very enticing, it's very convenient. With Google ad blocker and all these other technological things that they have out there. But the other side ultimately is more fulfilling and is more worthwhile and will make a significant impact with just the smallest decisions that you make in life.
I want to speak about this. We have your perspective here over, obviously, being an older generation. When you look back, or you look now and you see this whole politically correct culture and how it sort of rewrites history, one of the things we talk about is how the blockchain can help preserve it, and that's the hope, is that through its mechanism that it helps do that. But we have this huge filter now that's put onto our culture, and you talk about watching that get to this point.
Yeah, it's the old analogy of the frog in the boiling water, you know. If we saw the change happen all at once, we would all be horrified and we'd jump out of the water. But I have seen it just incrementally over the years, and you hardly notice from one year to the next that you're getting more limitations on what is acceptable to say. But one of the things I think everybody in this room probably would have to agree about, a positive thing from the Trump administration, is that he kind of took that whole political correctness idea and put it in the dumpster. I mean, he seemed to have won the election because he was politically incorrect. And I think that was something that I appreciated more than anything else, because it meant that there was still a responsive chord in a large percentage of the population. And they were just waiting for somebody to do it, you see? And once they had somebody, a popular national figure, do it and get away with it and not wind up being incarcerated because of it and got to be president, well, now it's okay to do. And so I think that is one very strong indication that we still have a strong reservoir of common sense in the American people. So it's not as bad as it may seem. I think we have to go back to that word theater. Much of what we're talking about is theater and its appearance. Now, that's not to denigrate it and say it's not important, because it's very real if it happens to you. And it's very real if it's used as a justification to issue martial law, for example. Now, big changes are made. But I just want to say that on the sensitivity issue, which you raised, I think that the American people are ready, and they've demonstrated that they're ready to throw that in the dumpster and to get on with the real issues. So we can talk about it pretty straightforward right now, as long as we can't use hate words.
Right.
Hate words like such as, I don't like what they're doing.
We'll open it up now, just say, we've got some questions here, so I'll go for it and give it to you.
So part of this conversation for me is a lot of content, and I want to go to the context of it, which is the historical perspective. And history is looked at from a lot of different perspectives, right? If you're the winner, you're the loser, you were there, what really happened. So when we talk about history, I guess what I see is a repetition. I see a cycle. I see a very cyclical pattern. You have states that are very authoritarian, then they come back to more liberal, it goes back and forth. And so the question around this, the question I have is about what's new? What's fundamentally new? And I get blockchain, I get cryptocurrency, I get some of the systematic points of that, but what I hear is a lot of repetition cycles. So we can go back 1,000 years and listen to a panel, and I respect your opinions, don't let that tone say anything else. And here's some of the same things. The state is too powerful. If you go against them, you have this. You have the media. Nobody knows what the real story is. And so my question is, looking at that cyclical nature of history, where we are, what's new? What is different as we move forward, so to speak, or outward in time, that will be new?
Well, I think I would like to comment on that one. I understand exactly what you're saying, because there's always some comfort in the idea that, well, we've gone through this before and we've come out okay. And to a large extent, that is true. However, what is new is the question. And the new thing that I see is called globalism. Up until this point, there's always been somewhere else to go. There's always been an opposing point of view. There's always been somebody who could come in and invade and take over the country. Yeah, I mean, the world was divided. So there was constant motion going on. So as long as the pot is boiling and things are moving, you can have a cycle. But if suddenly everything freezes into cement, and there's no place to go, no other monetary system to take, no country to go to, no other philosophical point of view allowed, and so forth, now all of a sudden things turn to cement. And I think this is a point in history that is different, and it should be very frightening, because if we don't prevent that cement from hardening up, it's going to be very hard to crack it afterwards.
Is this why Elon wants to go?
You had a question?
Yeah, so my question is more from the censorship side, both of you and you, I'd ask this, where a lot of people don't necessarily realize that Google, to get highly ranked on Google, generally you have to do two things. You have to not violate whatever sort of politics they're running, and generally you have to pay money, whether it's ads or that sort of thing. And then further on top of that, you have like Google, Facebook, and YouTube censoring viewpoints. My question is especially like with the blockchain or political stuff, let's just take the example, is Bitcoin in a bubble? If they censor every counter argument to that, when an average person, and not many people even want to look for info, but the average person is going to go out there and look for info, is blockchain in a bubble or is Bitcoin in a bubble? All they see is state articles, yes, or anything politically. My question is from somebody that does a lot of research, it looks like we're nearing a very critical threshold where there's so much censorship, even those looking for answers are no longer being able to find them.
Yeah, I think I can address that. Well, the first thing, I want to speak from experience about what we're going through with Bitcoin.com. We just recently got listed, and I'm not sure the process to do this, but it wasn't easy to do. We recently got listed where we actually show up when people do news searches for Bitcoin-related searches. But the funny thing with that is that they associate us with Bitcoin as if we're the company that runs Bitcoin and that mints the currency. So every time there's an article that shows up by Bitcoin.com, it says press release next to it. So that is probably going to confuse people as to what the nature of Bitcoin is and cause some issues like that. Now, where I think the positive way to look at this and where we're going is with blockchain protocols in general. So now, hopefully, we can get outside the scope of relying on, and this is future thinking, of course, we can get outside the scope of relying on centralized systems and search networks like Google to find the information that we're looking for, and all of this is going to get transferred, and we're sort of in the process of doing that, transferred over to blockchain-based technologies where the search for information is more democratized, and the soft bannings, like Luke talked about, aren't happening as much, or the other thing that they call it is a shadow ban, where they prevent certain amount of views from occurring because of that individual's or that organization's view count. So it's my hope that, and we're already, like I said, we're in the process of doing this, but we're getting to a point where the blockchain-based search engine, there's one being created right now, I forget the name of it, it slips my mind, but there's already a search engine being built on top of the blockchain right now that has the potential to easily overpower the conglomerate search engines that we have now, like Google, et cetera.
Luke, you could just talk about that real fast too. Like, for example, if you type in, what does the alt-right believe? All you're going to see is, specific articles designed to, sway your opinion.
Well, yeah, of course. To me, right now, answering your question too, to me, it's now or never. Like, the door to total freedom and liberation is open, but it's closing very fast. They can't censor everything right now, but they're fine-tuning it. They're messing with this person here, they're manipulating this here, they're doing soft censorship here. They're fine-tuning it and testing it out. what they did was pretty much acted like a drug dealer. Like, hey, come in, get this free hit of free information, talk to anyone, learn about anything. And now they start slowly closing it in. So that door, it closing on us, that is our true liberation and freedom, and really sets a different cycle that we've seen anywhere else in the world right now, because actually right now we actually do have a chance. The worst enemy towards an empire is, of course, truth. Truth could cripple and destroy corporations, government, within a matter of instants, because it's only our participation within those corporations, within those governments, within those platforms that allows them to be so successful. They got us hooked on that drug. It's time to wake up, time to go to rehab and look at alternatives. That door, it's closing. It's closing very fast. It's closing faster than you think. And it's really important to go to DuckDuckGo or Steemit instead of all the other platforms. It's more important than ever.
Let me just throw, we're talking about blockchain technology. Can you also touch upon and explain and talk about oracles? Can we imprint real information into the blockchain that then gets basically coded in as close as we can get to objective history? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So what we're doing with blockchain technology right now is a blockchain itself is just an immutable ledger, so that anything that is created on the blockchain, as long as that network is running and as long as miners are mining or whatever the proof of stake algorithm is working, then we're always going to have a trustless system where whatever is put onto that blockchain is always documented, it's timestamped, it's verified, and it's there for future histories. What's happening now is we're in a situation where a lot of information is being stored on local networks, stored server side, and anything that goes wrong with those systems, or if a government agency comes in and tears those systems down, where they no longer exist anymore, that information is just gone. So with blockchain technology, and this will only improve as we move into the future, is these trustless systems are obtaining large amounts of data, and it can be extremely large, and it's just going to continue to grow. This is going to continue to protect us from losing information. Mr. What's your name, sir? my brain is a little fried after this point.
We're hiding.
Mr. Griffin, Mr. Jekyll Island. Right. Well, he talked about the fear earlier of what happens with technology is that we can potentially lose information over time, or if a server drops, that information is just gone. Well, what we're trying to do technologically is create new systems and new algorithms that prevent that from happening, and this is what the network model of cryptographic systems actually allows to happen. You know, Bitcoin would have never been created had we not solved what we call the double spend problem, and that's what would be the first fear or concern about a cryptocurrency is, what if somebody just copies and pastes that money into a different account? So what Satoshi Nakamoto did, and this is written about in the white paper, was solve that double spend problem through this proof of work mining and on a consensus network. So it makes it more impervious to being lost. And now, because of grapheme technology like that of Steemit, we're able to store large amounts of information, large amounts of data on these blockchains that is highly impervious and highly resistant. It's what they call tamper resistant, so that people can't get involved and just delete that information or it's not centralized. It's not a honeypot that any kind of attacker, hacker, or malicious agent can just get involved with and tear down. So and the smart contracting functions and oracles, all this stuff is going to continue growing in the future, and we're seeing it right now. How many of these different initial coin offerings and how many different platforms are being created every day? I keep up with the news in the Bitcoin space and the blockchain space. I have to read every day hundreds of articles. That's what it feels like. It's probably not quite that many, but I can't keep up with it. Somebody writes an article, I'm like, what's this? I've never heard about this before. So I have to learn something new every day because so many new inventions are being created, and it's all happening at rapid pace, at the speed of light. But it's amazing because now we're protecting ourselves from these type of issues, and we have data that's effectively placed on the blockchain.
Can you just real quick, just on a technological, just explain an oracle, what that means on a blockchain? Can you give?
I'm only loosely familiar with the term, but I know it has to do with smart contracting, keeping data information safe on the...
Well, I know like insurance companies,
right.
If a storm comes through, what they'll do is then they'll bring in the real data, it comes onto the blockchain, correct? And then that
data is embedded, so it's real
Right.
data. It's not going to be tampered with.
Right. And that's sort of what's also occurring with what we refer to as prediction markets, where there's certain data that's being put in called wisdom of the crowd on a lot of these platforms. And some of these are still what they call ERC20 tokens. It's Ethereum-based tokens built on the Ethereum blockchain. But what is the name of the one? It slips my mind. Not Aragon. What is the one that is the prediction market? Who I know somebody in here knows about it. Augur. That's it. That's what I was thinking of. There's a couple, but Augur, it's data that's in real time, that's trustless, that's on the blockchain, that is determined by consensus by people who are betting on something that's going to happen in the future. So that is oracleized in that sense, in that it's data that's active right there. It's truth. It's verifiable truth on the blockchain. So if that little
that's what I wanted.
clarifies, yeah.
On the addiction comment, because I think it's dead on. This is an addiction, and in addiction biology rarely ever works going cold turkey, any transition meds. And I think we do have a problem with things like Steemit, in that it's very difficult for you to use social media tools that host to multiple social media sites and also get to Steemit. If you post another site, Steemit often devalues it because it's been seen somewhere else. And if we need to make this transition off of the old system to these blockchain systems, we can't do it cold turkey. You got to find APIs that allow us to host it. Hootsuite is one that hosts to all of these places. We've got to get it into Steemit and the other blockchains. That way we can make the transition without putting somebody into seizure in the process.
Right. And this is an interesting topic because it makes me think about when the automobile was originally manufactured and people had the first automobiles. The problem is that we have one foot in a legacy system with old technology, and we're trying to build on this new system that we've just created. Remember when the first automobile was built, it was built in an environment where the horse and the buggy and the carriage were active, so everybody's cars would get stuck, they couldn't drive, they malfunctioned. But now we have, and this is always what happens, innovators create on an old infrastructure, on a broken, rickety infrastructure. So in order to move beyond that infrastructure, we have to build new infrastructure. So what we're building with blockchain is new infrastructure, so we can make this information, this blockchain information, more accessible so people can get to it. And eventually, people will stop laughing, because when the automobile got stuck, the early Ford models, people were like, that'll never be an innovative technology. No one will ever use that. We're going to stay using our horse and carriage. And I think Andreas Antonopoulos also spoke on this particular subject. But that's what's happening. We're building new infrastructure, so we don't denigrate the value. We're going to have to continue to use blockchain, and it'll eventually grow to where that's where the sole value is, and we don't lose that value by having to spread it to centralized media sources and honeypots and those kind of things.
Hey, Sterling, I have a question. You mentioned the possibility of having another search engine based on the blockchain technology.
Yes.
What would that look like, and how far away is that from market?
Yeah, a lot of these newer blockchain-based technologies, because they're being built on top of the Ethereum network, and we need to create blockchains that are a lot faster and a lot more scalable. So having these in full function and full fruition is probably a little ways away from now. I would say a few years yet before it's fully functional, before we can actually use these things. But they're trying to build them right now. And that's the thing when it comes to this technology, because of the nature of scalability, trying to figure out how to scale these things and create economies to scale is very difficult. And this is why Dan Larimer is working on a project called EOS right now that is supposed to be a competitor to Ethereum, that is supposed to be more easily scalable so that we can grow it and create more adoption. So when we have more adoption, when we have more network effect, that's when these technologies really start to blossom, and the value proposition has to be there as well. Because when you're using a blockchain, you're always or generally using an asset to act as the glue that keeps that project together. But you're right, it will be a little time before some of these decentralized.
But would it function basically the same as the existing search engines?
It wouldn't be centralized or server side, and it would be based on the consensus protocols that blockchain's technology use. So it would be a truly democratized group of people determining how it works based on algorithmic rules, right? When it comes to Google, the guy who's the head of Google or whoever's over that department can make a decision on what shows the shadow banning can take.
Wikipedia sure needs that. Really?
Yeah. There's some wiki ideas coming as well, blockchain. What is it? They say tokenize everything, tokenize the world. Let's create these blockchains and continue building, get rid of this centralized targets. Yeah.
Any other questions out there?
So just, I'm new to this space. What's the best way to get uncensored information real time?
Where do I search for that?
You can go to Steam It. You can get real uncensored information right away. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to tell the room here about Cliff High. I don't know if you guys know about Cliff High, but he has a program called the WebBot. And he's been doing it since like the 90s, but he does deep data mining of the internet. So he basically, in a nutshell, is like reading the subconscious mind of the internet. And it's like having a cheat sheet to the crypto space because of the information he's able to collect collectively of all of us talking about it and stuff. Humans are psychic in the way that we speak and the words that our subconscious mind has us use, and we don't pick up on it individually in conversation with each other, but when he does stuff like the lexicon and deep data mining, those psychic undertones come out, and the data sets he comes up with are like really fascinating.
This is what I'm talking about.
Pasthuman.com.
Yeah, this is what I was talking about. There's so many new things technologically. I've never heard of that before. So many new things technologically that you can't keep up with it. And this is what a great artificial intelligence, well-known person in the artificial intelligence field talked about, Kurzweil. Kurzweil talked about this idea of the law of accelerating returns. So as we move into the future, technology expands at an exponential rate. It's not linear, it's exponential. So it's gonna be to a point where we can't at all keep up with technology because it's growing. And we're entering into the beginning stages of that. You can see it with blockchain technology, with these different data mining type of technologies. So we're on the cusp. We're on the precipice of something totally beautiful. Kurzweil called it a singularity. I don't know if it's going to be a singularity, but that's a cool way to look at it. It's an amazing time that we live in. It really is.
Tribe.io is another one that's just starting right now. It's using kind of a prediction market-based blockchain to censor news, and not censor news, but to present it and have it reviewed, almost in a peer review fashion, where the reviewers get coins and the reviewers get rated for how accurate their reviews are. So there's a little bit of a 360-degree view throughout the process that's encouraged and motivated through cryptocurrency.
What's it called?
Tribe.io.
Tribe.io.
Okay, well, I think this is the last roundtable of the day. We got Lynn Ulbricht's over, and Lynn Ulbricht's getting ready to go over in the main room. And then tonight, guys, we can all relax, give our brains a break. And we've got a lot of music over at the Belly Up, so that's going all night. So go on over and have a good time.
So where's the